We have a recording. Welcome everyone to Deeper Dive number 61. 61 conversations with electronic music producers of all kind. Very, very often in this sort of setting, we focus on club-related music or music for listening at home as sort of standalone music. But sometimes we also cover more sort of applied applications of music. And one person that I have wanted to talk to for a very, very long time is our next guest, Lena Raine. Welcome to the
Hello.
Deeper Dives. How
Thank
are
you.
you?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well.
Nice, nice. How's
Hello,
you're
everyone.
in Seattle, right?
No, I'm in Vancouver,
Oh,
BC in
Vancouver.
Canada. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Okay, so everything feeling like reasonably, you know, nice weather-wise, or are you?
Yeah, it's kind of hovering, it's not quite as heat wavy as the rest of the world right now.
Yeah,
So thankful for some slightly mild summer weather. But it's
nice,
getting a little warmer this week, so
nice.
it's still reasonable.
Yeah. Just chilling in Vancouver.
Yeah,
That sounds pretty awesome, actually.
yeah.
It was funny. Well, you are known sort of for mostly gaming music as well as sort of movie soundtracks. You are also very busy. It was funny. I was looking at the your website, and it said Lena is currently full on projects for 2022 and beyond. So I felt like if you're 4 years late updating the website, you're probably really busy. so so
Yeah,
that's
I
a
mean, I
good sign, I
haven't.
would say.
Yeah, I haven't updated that website in a while. I actually have one for my studio and one for my personal Lena.fyi, and that's the one I haven't updated in a while. So
Yeah,
but it still applies. I'm definitely sort of on a as accepted only project load right now. Just
nice.
more than I can handle, and I will eventually be whittling it down to what I can handle.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, it sounds like you're really, really busy with all kinds of projects, which we're going to be talking a little bit about today, I guess.
Yeah.
First off, though, I wanted to kind of rewind to how you got into the sort of gaming industry, I suppose, as a
Hmm.
composer, because you did grew up in Seattle, I think, right, which is kind of for people sort of outside of the U.S. quite a sort of tech heavy environment, where a lot of sort of bigger tech companies and sort of adjacent companies work, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like sort of developing as I was growing up. I'm a child of the 80s, so I was growing up, in the 80s and 90s, and as things were developing, and sort of, it was definitely felt like there was momentum there. And then as I was getting into music, I kind of already had like a focus on games, just from playing games when I was growing up, and really kind of acclimating towards those soundtracks and those sounds, like the just like really like first chiptune stuff on like earlier consoles, and then like Rompler samples on Super Nintendo and PlayStation, all that stuff,
Yeah.
of just really loving just sort of the imperfect grittiness of those sounds, and just wanting to do more like that. And then in college, being very much pushed to not do that. So uh, but
Did,
learning a lot more about, actually writing for instruments while I was there.
did you on sort of early consoles? Did you already experiment with sort of making music yourself, or?
Yeah, like when I was growing up, another, bonus was that my dad is a composer as well. And so he had a basement studio in the house that I grew up in. So I was able to go down and just like play with like old, like, Korg and Moog synths in his studio, record like from basically before I could even talk.
Nice.
Uh, of just, banging on keyboards and recording things and hearing how it sounded and being like really intrigued by that. And so early on, he gifted me just like a Yamaha PSR 530, I think was the keyboard that I got. And that just had like a bunch of like general MIDI sounds, just, high quality ones, and was essentially just hooking that up to my computer with MIDI and audio input output, and just, making MIDI tunes basically. And making albums while I was in middle school, high school.
Nice. And so, was that what was this sort of inspired by? Was it by um, like music you heard on the radio, or is it much more sort of in that gaming environment already? Or
Combination of things. Like it definitely started from a lot of video game type sounds, but then there was also like films. Like I was, in love with the music that was featured in The Matrix. When I was growing up, and other films along those lines. Games, music that was on the radio, like a lot of alternative stuff, and it just kind of pooling all those inspirations into just a collection of weird songs that I was writing, as if they were going to be for a soundtrack to something, but
yeah,
kind of just making up stories and writing music for them.
yeah. Um, were you sort of thinking about finding like work in that sort of area at that time, or was it really just sort of more on a sort of hobby
Mm.
level, or how
Yeah, I
serious were
mean,
you about it?
that was definitely a dream. I remember being in high school and looking at more information about a composer that I idolized at the time, a guy named Yasunori Mitsuda, who's a Japanese composer who wrote for games like Chrono Trigger, Xenogears. And I remember reading his like profile, and it's like, oh, he got his first big break was when he was 30. And so it was like, okay, you can be young and still do this. So no, that was like my concept
Yeah,
of getting into the industry. It was like, oh wow, by 30 I could actually like, uh
still do it. Oh, hold on, you muted.
I somehow muted myself. That's cool. Anyways, hopefully they didn't cut out too much. But yeah, no, and so like that was sort of like the plan, but I didn't know how to do that from Seattle necessarily because video games to me, like I didn't know that video games were being made like in Seattle. Like I just assumed that they were all just made in Japan because that was the games that I played. That was like the stuff that I was really into.
Yeah.
And so when I was in college, when I was like out of college and looking for work, I was like looking up all the studios. Like Bungie was making the Halo series, and Valve was making Half-Life and all that stuff. And um, naively, I put together a demo CD and like sent it off to them and heard nothing because obviously, like, they have in-house composers, they have, all these, folks that are already working for them. And so I was like, I'll never get a job in the game industry. But it was also like 2006. So
Hmm.
like indie games weren't huge yet. It was not like, I didn't know necessarily like that you could get a job with a very small studio.
Right.
Like the only indie game that I knew about at the time was a game called Cave Story, which was done by a solo developer in Japan, and it was incredible. It was like, wow, you could actually do this as like a solo developer, but like you have to be really smart because he programmed the whole thing. He did all the art. He did all, he did everything. He made all the systems that he built the game in. Like, so I felt intimidated. I was like, I can't do that.
So as a noob question, right? Like,
Yeah.
talk us through how that sort of shift happened because obviously, sort of 80s 90s, all the games were made by these big companies, sort of
Mm.
massive rollouts, right? And then what is kind of that shift to sort of indie gaming? How would you describe that?
I mean, that all kind of really happened while I was trying to get into the games industry on my own.
Hmm.
Because after I couldn't really find stable work as a composer out of college, I wanted to get a job in the games industry. So I went into QA. I ended up working for a contracting company that was hiring for testing positions at Nintendo of America because that was also in Seattle or Redmond at the time, and they
Hmm.
still are. Uh, and so I, lucked out of just like getting into the building at like this company that published a ton of games that I grew up playing. And I wasn't really an employee of the company, but I was still doing like some work for the company
Yeah, you are in the
that
building.
yeah, I was in the building,
Yeah.
and that was hugely inspiring. Like I spent a couple of years there and met a bunch of people, and through those people, I got other little contract testing gigs, and eventually I landed at a company called ArenaNet, which makes the Guild Wars series, and they had already shipped Guild Wars 1 years ago, and they were working on their next game, Guild Wars 2, and so I joined the testing team for that game and really fell in love with game development there because I was really hands-on with the tools. I got to see like how things were being made as I was testing them. I was like going into the tools and being like, I think I know actually why this broke is because this scripting is not set up correctly, et cetera. And like kind of finding the, digging into the details, so to speak. And it eventually led me to get a design job there.
Right.
It opened up, I applied for it, and because I had hands-on experience with the tools already, because I was staying after hours messing around with them, um, I, got the job and just kind of got into the industry as a designer,
Yeah.
as and was there for like 6, 7 years before I actually went full-time composer.
So when sort of games are developed in like little environments like that,
Hmm.
would you say sort of game design and music and graphics, like everything kind of happens simultaneously while in the design process, which is quite different, I suppose, from say movie composing where everything is
Yeah.
made and then all the way at the end they're like, oh yeah, music. We have to we have to
Well,
call someone to make the music, right?
yeah, I mean, for films, like very often it's like, okay, while they're working on it, they have a temp score, right? They've got
Yeah.
all this music that are pulling in from various other sources and falling in love with that and getting really attached to it, which,
Yeah.
something I have beef with. But and games don't necessarily do that a lot. Like they might have like a playlist that like the lead designer has of like this is the vision for this game, and they'll pull in like their favorite artist now, like because they have the budget for it, and be like, I envisioned you writing the music for this game, so will you do it? And they're like, sure, I guess. And that's kind of how big AAA scores happen these days. But for a lot of it, like especially for smaller games, like composers come in pretty early and are working with either like the solo developer or the small team, the sort of the vision keeper for the game,
Hmm.
and figuring out what the music sounds like, really, really early on. And in my experiences, at least, like that's been a huge boon of just getting in there and like helping to develop the world at the same time as everyone else is sort of creating the different aspects of it.
Yeah. Is there sort of like a sort of hierarchical structure, I guess, that works in teams like that? And where is this sort of
Yeah.
composer in that structure?
I mean, it's usually kind of like, especially for a smaller team, it's like sort of it weights towards like who is sort of the director on it. Like, is it, the person who's programming the game? Is it the designer of the game? Is it both? Is it, the writer of the game? It can really kind of come from anywhere. A lot of times the director of a game could just be like, someone who's doing the art of it, and then like everyone else is kind of like pitching in there.
Hmm.
But very, very frequently in indie games, like it's either the writer or like the designer of the game.
Yeah.
And the music and audio stuff tends to go directly to them.
Hmm.
And everyone kind of sort of branches off from there. But there's a lot of like cross communication, especially on the teams that I'm involved in, where uh, it's, everyone's kind of talking to everyone. Everyone's getting inspired by everyone. And for bigger projects that I've worked on, it's usually like they're big enough that they have like an audio team, right? They have an audio director, they have someone who is sort of the vision keeper for audio, and they report to the director of the game, they report to the producers, et cetera. And so it's kind of that's the hierarchy there for a larger team. It's usually the audio director or the director of the game or the writers in collaboration.
Yeah. I am kind of imagining that writing music as
Hmm.
part of this sort of team. And as well, I guess, like in these sort of like indie teams, that are quite small, where sort of like design decisions are being made kind of on the spot, whereas you have to almost immediately respond to that musically, right? Like, I
Hmm.
can also imagine that sort of your workflow and the sort of way you create music is very, very different from, say, how like a, sort of run of the mill electronic music producer that just sort of lives in their studio and just sort of creates everything, sort of autonomously. That's very different, right? Are you sort of actually creating the music in the teams, or do you sort of are more of a listener and an observer in those teams, and then you go back home or in the studio to sort of work on stuff?
Yeah, I'm very much like I have to hold myself away in my little creative studio. This is my studio, by the way.
Yeah, your world.
If you can tell, it's part of the living room, which is connected to the kitchen. Um, and, but it's, it's just a space where I've got all my stuff here that I can work with. But I very much need to kind of be isolated in that space to create the music that I want to make. We'll often have like meetings, either in person or the in just like an online call or something, just kind of going over like what are the needs, like what are the sort of basics that we all sort of have agreed upon to approach the score with, and I'll get you know Google Docs or spreadsheets or whatever of like here's all the cues that we need, or here's the inspirations, here's like a link to like 10 different YouTube videos of things that I was thinking about when I was writing this character, things of those nature of that nature.
Yeah.
And I will take all of that and I will kind of just like isolate myself for a while and try to just compose in the spot, but very frequently I need to kind of like let it simmer in my brain for a while and just kind of go for a walk or take a shower or do something that I'm distracting myself and then letting inspiration come to me, and I'll just kind of something pops into my head and I'm like, okay, let's record that. Like I'll do a little like a note on my phone or audio notes sort of a thing, and just kind of jot the idea down, and then when I'm back at the studio, then I can load that up and I can start to transcribe and start to mess with sounds and get synths going, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I think in the earlier conversation between us, you mentioned that you have like a chaos workflow. Um, like a lot of the times when I'm sort of talking to people who are sort of in this space or in the electronic music space,
Hmm.
um, they often think that they have a chaos workflow where everything sort of seems to like be very disorganized. But if you sort of start to break it down a little bit more, then there is always kind of like an ideation process, where you sort of gather new ideas and sort of put, like you said, like jot things down in a notebook or something like that, right?
Hmm.
And then maybe like a sort of middle section where you start to flesh out those ideas, where they become sort of longer pieces of music that you could eventually sort of take to a team.
Yeah.
And then maybe like a finishing section where the music's finalized, mixed in some cases or mastered in some cases, right?
Mhm.
Would you be able to sort of describe these sort of three maybe periods of working on music that way?
Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, I mean even if the actual like construction of the piece is kind of very slapdash, like feels chaotic in the moment. Yeah, like I definitely come to it with that sort of ideation phase of sketching out ideas, even if it's just, things I'm humming to myself or stuff that gets stuck in my head. I'm doing that or jotting it down with like a piano sketch or something. And then I flesh it out enough that I can be like, okay, this captures at least enough of my idea that I can share it with the whoever I'm reporting to and get a sort of confirmation that I'm on the right track.
Yeah,
And that's a pretty important part because I don't want to finish a piece, fall in love with it, and then show it to the creator, the creator on the team and be like, hey, here's the piece. And they're like, that actually isn't anything what I was thinking of, kind of a thing where, yeah, I mean, sometimes that happens in a positive way where I'll like, come up with an initial idea and like present it and be like, that's not what I was thinking at all, but I actually like that better. So we'll go with it. And then sometimes, it just, the direction doesn't quite work out, or there's something that needs to be tweaked. And a lot of the process for me there is learning to interpret how what they're talking about and like what they actually need to hear for them to be on board with what you're trying to create for the track.
yeah.
um
And so the
yeah.
ideation, is it melodic ideas? Is it rhythmic structures? Is it maybe samples or sounds? Like what are the things that you sort of gravitate towards?
Yes, all of the above.
Oh,
It
okay.
really it really could be anything,
Yeah,
depending on the track, right? If it's a very like melodic, theme that I need to do, like I really need to nail the theme, the melody for the track. Like I really have to come up with a strong melody, has a good motif, a good hook, that's something that I can remix and into other things and reuse across the project, because if I can't, then it's not a very good theme. And that's sort of like what makes a good theme for me, is sort of the malleability of it. If it's something that has to have this sort of long-term interest to it, like I really want to flesh out the structure. So that's where I would like bring in a piano sketch to kind of go through the chord changes, to go through here's the structure, the bare bones of the piece without all of the work that goes into making it a full arrangement, but I at least know that it sounds good as like a minute and a half of music or something.
Hmm.
Um, and then sometimes it's just like, oh, initial interest, like you want to find a cool patch, a cool sound to kind of like really catch the ear. And so you start with that. Like I'll just go through presets in my VSTs for like an hour and just like, no, not this, not this, not this. Okay, there's the one. And then start riffing on my keyboard or something and finding something that kind of sounds cool, like a little like ostinato or chord or whatever it is that just kind of gets me excited to keep writing the piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I just can't imagine like the importance of finding that initial theme, right? Because
Mm,
I guess the whole structure of, especially in video games, is that you have to find that one sort of motif which then gets sort of infinitely remixed in all these different versions, right? To sort of
yeah.
make sure that, you have enough of sort of longevity for people to be able to play this thing for hours and hours and not feel like they're listening to the exact same loop the whole time, right?
Yeah, and if everything is done well, like either the implementation of it or the pace at which new music is playing, or the how interesting a 5 minute piece of music is, like ideally you don't want to get the player into a state where they're like, okay, no more music. I'm just going to put on a playlist on Spotify or something. Like, you ideally want to have the soundscape of the game be interesting enough that it's keeping them in there. And sometimes that's not why someone's playing a game. Sometimes someone's just putting on a game to just kind of idle while they're watching a TV show or something. And that's
Yeah.
fine. But those aren't usually the kinds of games that I like to get into because I know that like my work isn't really going to be like a major part of it. So,
Yeah.
it's really kind of it is, games are a multifaceted medium. So it really could be a variety of experiences that people are having with them.
Yeah.
And so as a composer, it's kind of like figuring out, what is your role in all of this and how much do you want to put into it to get X amount out.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, about the ideation phase, I guess, how much does sort of visualization come into play as well? Because
Mm,
obviously, when you're sort of sitting in a room or in like a virtual room with the people that are actually designing the game,
mm,
and you get a feel of what something looks like and feels
yeah.
like, and like how important is that? And then like, do you use like references from like real life or other experiences to sort of like add to that, or how does that
Mm.
work?
I, I mean, visualization is definitely a big thing for me, especially when it comes to games and environments, characters. I kind of need to know what a character looks like to kind of start making a piece about them, even if it's just like concept art or like references of like here's some ideas that we're bringing to the concept of art of the character to really bring them to life. Like I need to know at least something about them, not just text, because
Yeah.
that really helps me, you know, picture it and hear it in my head.
But do you
And
have
and
any
for an
examples of that? Like, kind
mm,
of, what are, for like, for example, recent games where so based a lot of the music on a specific character or at least an idea?
well, funny you mentioned that. That actually segues perfectly into the second part that I wanted to get into,
Okay.
because one of the more recent projects that I had was writing a character theme for a game. And should I just intro into
Yeah, sure.
talking about
Yeah.
this
I
track?
didn't do this on purpose, by the way, but so-
It worked out well, and I was
yeah,
looking at the time, like, yeah, it's
nice.
about time to start going into the actual process. So I actually put together just like a little bit of sort of behind the scenes of like how I composed this theme for a character. It's a game called Of the Devil. It's a visual novel that has been releasing episodically. It's sort of a combination of like a like courtroom procedural type game like Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, and also with more of a sort of cyberpunk setting to it. And so that already kind of like starts to bring a lot of interesting ideas to mind because the game series and also the setting kind of bring with a lot of baggage with them when it comes to how those games sound. And Also, the fun thing too is that the game had already released two, like a prologue and an episode one. So I was coming in on episode two to
Hmm.
write a theme for the main character, basically. And so this is a character, her name's Morgan. She is a defense attorney. She is very sort of like a lot of her aesthetics are sort of revolved around like poker aesthetics of like betting big to win big kind of a thing. So like this really kind of like playful devilishness to her. So I was given a lot of references for this character, and um, in the brief that I got, like there is like a list, like I mentioned, like there's a list of like 10 YouTube videos of existing music that was really inspirational to the writer when he was coming up with his character. Some of which are, from the Ace Attorney series, and so I can play you a couple of the references here that I got that was kind of like the springboard for me to uh, begin writing.
Hmm.
So this, once the sharing is started here,
Yeah.
this was a track from the Great Ace Attorney series, and this was sort of one of my favorites also of just like a turnabout theme, which is basically like what happens when the lawyer is like, ah, I got you. They're sort of turning the tables, they're sort of getting the upper hand, which is where this theme would be playing in the game I was writing it for. So here's a little bit of that theme. So just a very, energetic. It's got a lot of like emphasis on the backbeat. Like there's sort of like the dup 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 dup, that sort of rhythm that goes, and that's very emblematic of the composer's style that have worked on that series. And that's a kind of like a very strong thing that I really wanted to bring into whatever track I was writing. And then the other inspiration was from an anime series called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Yeah.
This is Giorno's theme, and was just this was like when I heard this, I was like, this is kind of like the elements that I want to bring into this track, which you'll hear pretty clearly. Skip ahead a little bit. So it's got like such a good personality to it. There's so
Yeah.
many fun elements going on there. There's like the really just kind of like rhythmic guitar stuff. There's some really good bass. There's some brass. There's some strings. I didn't want to bring all of those into the track, obviously, but I wanted to kind of, at least give a little bit of that sort of energy to it to really kind of bring some character into it.
So, do you, when you
Yeah.
hear like a little, I guess, mood board,
Mhm.
YouTube clips for your particular project, do you analyze it that way as well? Like, oh, maybe the bass from this, and maybe some of the strumming guitar from that, like that could work together. Is that kind of how you do it, or are you strictly vibes?
I usually have to stick to vibes because if I start like getting into like the deep analysis, then I could like sort of risk like completely ripping it off.
Yeah,
Like I really want to kind of just get like, here's the essentials, here's the outline of like what is making the sound work for me. Either if it's in the composition of it or if it's in the instrumentation. So like little elements here and there, but then I still want to go away from the music and just let the impression sit with me and then kind of come back with my own approach.
yeah.
And that's kind of how I get started.
Nice. I
Um,
get like a sort of film noir, kind of
yeah.
semi-futuristic, but still has
Mhm.
some sort of old school element to it, right? Like some sort of
Yeah.
60s or 50s even. That kind
exactly. It's
of
kind of like, it's that smoky neo-noir thing
yes,
going on.
yeah, yeah.
So basically what happened there is like I usually like when I'm recording ideas, like I'll record them on my phone. I actually looked through my phone and I couldn't find anywhere that I actually like recorded me singing this. So I was just really kind of like humming it to myself and then getting it stuck in my head and then coming to my DAW, which I used Ableton Live on this one, which I can share here. Uh. So here we are in my project file, and right now we're just scroll all the way to the top here with the piano tracks, but I can show you on this side here. Um, to start with, I don't really use a template necessarily. Like a lot of like film composers or game composers will have like a template for a project that they're working on. And I because I don't spend the time on it. Like I don't really like come up with like here's all the instruments that I'm usually using. Like I just have a giant list of like all of uh my VST plugins here. So I just have just a big old list of stuff and I just browse through it and find stuff.
Mhm.
But what I do have, and I work in Bitwig right now. But for this project I was in Live. And so I have basically just like a really, really basic template that I start with. Like I have two drum tracks. So it's here's where MIDI drums could be. Like I just have like a basic like kick on here. Um, and no, it's not even solo or this is solo, so I can't hear it. But just a basic kick that I can just get a beat going for something, and then I have a slot for samples if I want to drag in like a loop or something.
Mhm.
And then in instruments, I just have like basic piano. So oops, it is not set. There we go. So that's just, a default plugin. It's really lightweight and just kind of lets me sketch things. And then I just have a basic synth. It's not great. It's just kind of like if I need another sound, and then a sub bass that I can just, really just lay in some like basic sub sub stuff, stuff to get in there if I need to like kind of emphasize something.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like the toolbox that I bring to a new project. Um, so for this track that I was working on, I started with a piano sketch because I was humming stuff to myself and I was kind of like getting ideas for like I really wanted like a bass riff because that was something that I felt was really strong about that initial piece, and so I started like humming this thing to myself of like da 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 ba ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da, and that was just kind of like this sort of like repeated figure that I was really going with, and so I went into the piano and just sketched this out. On a big chord. Uh,
Yeah.
and I just, I went through, and I think I may have started on the bass part and just like brought in this sort of distorted bass just to play along with the piano to get that sound figured out. And so really just got that kind of like bass part locked in. And then I didn't really do much else with it in the arrangement. I just went through and I wanted to get the structure of it figured out because this was a track that I knew was going to be playing during like a part of the game where you're really kind of just like feeling victorious, feeling kind of really confident and full of yourself. And like, reading the text that this music was accompanying, like should feel like, you are on the home stretch, you're about to win this case, sort of a thing. And so I really wanted to get that sort of loop going. And so what I ended up doing is I just kind of built it out like a song. I just have like this intro build and I just put markers here to kind of mark out the different sections. I have the intro, I have the verse, the chorus, the second verse, second chorus, and then sort of an alt chorus. There was a variation on it with a different chord progression. And then I have this B section, which I called the diversion, uh, which you'll hear in just a sec. I'm just going to play through this whole thing so you can kind of get an idea for how these sections transition.
Mhm.
already getting that sort of like that backbeat, that offbeat rhythm going, and a little melody at the top there. So it's the same progression as the first verse. And so this is sort of the alt chorus, which just kind of builds on the melody ideas in the previous sections. Fun little sort of harpsichord-esque figure here. I wanted to introduce some sort of like, sense of uncertainty. Like maybe you still have some doubts. Maybe you're still getting pushback from the prosecution and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
you kind of have all these ideas that you're playing with. And so this was like the core minute of music that I really wanted to focus on writing first.
Yeah. And so this,
Um,
did you take
yeah.
this to the team as well when you
Uh,
sort of have, is this kind of like the state where you sort of have your music in when you sort of start playing it to people, or
No,
not yet?
I held on for just a little bit because I really wanted to get like the intro sorted.
Okay.
So like the intro was the first thing I developed out
Yeah.
and was what I presented to the team as kind of like here's where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So I really had to figure out like, okay, how am I going to accompany the piano here? And I eventually didn't use the piano at all in the final version. I just, cut it out entirely. But as I'm building it out, like I'm keeping it active so that I can kind of hear how these parts that I'm developing fit alongside the rest of the piece.
Yeah.
So I have this sort of distorted bass, I've got a clean bass, and so I started, figuring out like, okay, now that I've got the intro bass, like how does this fit into the verse? So I can kind of get an idea there. And then usually like if I'm doing like a really rhythmic track, like I really want to get the drums figured out. And so for this track, I actually did like a funny little hybrid. I tended to do this with tracks, but I have like MIDI kits. I've got more MIDI kits, and then like electronic drums, and then I've got like samples. Um, so I actually found like a drum loop from a sample pack that I had bought that I really loved for the chorus. So for the verse, I have, or the intro and the verse, I have this really fun, just kind of jazzy snare pattern going. And really just, emphasizing those offbeats because that's like really the part that I really wanted to dig into.
How
And
did you
then I
do
also
these?
have
Is it just all punched in, or how did you?
this is all played
Yeah. Yeah.
with MIDI, and then I've got this is can you see the pop-up
Nice.
window here?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the Tokyo Scoring drum kits library that I used.
Nice.
Really, really fun kit. Really good for like large arrangements. And then here I just have like it's EXO, which is, very, very good drum tool that I just find all of my drums in. And and so I just have some like little emphasis like electronic drums in here. So I just got like a 4-on-4 kind of kick drum and a little snare that comes in here. And this is played along with the kit here. And then I have this drum sample that I really loved, and this is from this is a library called Massive Breaks by Mark Fletcher, is the drummer for Massive Attack.
Hmm.
Just really loved these drums, and just kind of I always find like some beat, like maybe I'll like replace it with actual drums eventually, but in this case I just use the actual drum loop here. So there's a couple of loops here. and then that's combined with a kit just to get more of a, like a live cymbal going.
Nice.
So that's the drums. And let's see. And I mean, that's kind of like, that's basically the start of it all. And then the big stuff that I brought in here was just a whole sax section. Because I really wanted to get that kind of live jazz, big band kind of feel as well. So then I just have this, and this took over the piano part. So here's just the sax parts, the drums, and the bass. Let's just play them all. That kind of stuff. And then the last part for the verse really was just getting the melody pulled in. And so I just have this trumpet and also like all the brass stuff. This is just like Contact like factory library. Like this is nothing fancy. Like this is just, a bunch of like baritone sax, some alto, some tenor. And it just, it sounds good when you just put it all together and put some reverb on it. I have this library called Walls. That's just a really nice like room verb that I put on
Hmm.
things, Club Grand.
Yeah.
And so then I have this trumpet lead, and that's just a synth. It's a preset in Vital. Oh, sorry, the synth is that. Sorry, I was I was looking at the wrong thing. The trumpet lead is actually this is a sound font. Like this is from a game series called Toho. And it's just a series of shooter games that have just like famously, great soundtracks, and I just love that trumpet sound. So it is now the trumpet that I always go to.
Nice.
So I have sort of a combination of that and the synths here. And yeah, I think that's basically everything. And so you can kind of now hear the full arrangement for the intro and verse. Whoops, if I unmute or if I unsolo everything. Etc. So I think the one thing I didn't cover was just this funny little siren synth that I put in there that I really liked. I just pan that from left to right. That was just something I found in Vital.
Nice. It's funny, like, well, not funny, but I was sort of going through a lot of your music, for sort of various games, and it seems that there's like several tools that you tend to use for different purposes, I guess. Like, all the way at the end of this, the sort of B section that you have that sort of little arpeggiated kind of melody.
Oh
Which I
yeah.
guess is, that sort of like gives it like a little bit more of a suspense kind of feel,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
I
Yeah, this
noticed, for
part.
example, in like Celeste or in like
Mm.
other stuff, that you use this kind of technique for that particular emotion in the tracks, right? And
Mm.
I guess that's
Yeah.
similar to, for example, how you solo, how you write like solo parts. They're always kind of like sort of singular notes throughout, not that much sort of chords or like stuff that plays together. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so I was kind of wondering, like, is that stuff that you consciously do, or is it just sort of stuff that sort of contributes to your style, or how do you?
Yeah, I think at this point it's just habit. And so you could say that it's part of my style because that's just kind of how I've been writing for 20 plus years at this point, of just things that I go back to because like those are like sort of the touchstones for me of like this really captures this feeling for me, and maybe through repetition it just continues to reinforce itself, and so I go back to those
Yeah.
sorts of things, and that's just kind of the habits that I fall back on. And then everything else is kind of like bringing, researching other music styles and bringing those in, but I still kind of, I'm always going to bring what I have to it, even if it's like a style I've never written in before. Like I don't think I've really done a bunch of like big band like brass writing, but I just kind of did it for this track because I was like, this seems appropriate and I want to try it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's amazing because you have so much liberty, I guess, sound wise, right? Where
yeah,
yeah, one game could be a big band, and another game could be something super
emotional solo
futuristic and
piano
synthy, or yeah,
or
or yeah,
whatever. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, or just pianos or whatever,
Hmm.
right? And I love
Yeah,
that you have so much freedom, sort of sonically, I guess, to sort of put your ideas into that,
yeah.
So what do you when you have this sort of like section? So now you have like a sort of very rough
Hmm.
idea with these sort of five different sections.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not going to be like a loop that sort of plays throughout the game, right? Like
Right.
now this
Well,
sort of goes to the
actually,
well, yeah, okay, but so it goes to
yeah,
the team obviously, and sort of
yeah.
suppose they are into it, which they were
Hmm.
in this case, right?
Yeah.
Um, so how is this sort of applied to the game? Because you wrote
Hmm.
this particular piece for a particular scene as well, right?
Yeah. And in that case, like it was actually a pretty simple implementation for the game because it's this sort of linear visual novel style. So like at a certain like essentially in like a visual novel, you are collecting a series of dialogue lines or like narration lines that during the lines you can trigger certain events to happen. So like in the case of this game, when something happens, okay, we start at the beginning of this track. But like there's at least like some amount of complication there where like, okay, this is a piece of music that has a very concrete beginning and it's got a loop to it. Whereas if you just loop one file, it's going to go all the way back to the intro, and you don't want that to happen. So, like, you still have to do some amount of implementation work to make sure that even this sort of simple through composed piece can loop well in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I ended up doing for this one, I already closed the project file, so I can't share, unfortunately, but I'm getting the next part ready. But the what I ended up doing is I split it out into kind of what we call like heads, loops, and sometimes tails. And so these are sort of very standardized, just I file structures for looping pieces of music that have a concrete end that you never want to hear more than once, a loop that you hear forever, potentially until you make it stop. And then sometimes you might have a tail, which is like, here's an outro that will play, like when you
Right.
are transitioning out of the loop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for a lot of music that I work on, like especially for like games that are fairly basic in their audio implementation, like just playing a looping piece of music and then it goes to another area, you play another piece of music. You kind of have that head loop structure. So what I essentially do is I define like, okay, what is the looping part? I write it all the way through the loop in the piece of music that I'm writing so that it loops seamlessly already in the piece,
Mm-hmm.
and then I do two recording passes. I mute everything after a certain point so that it plays the head, it plays like the intro parts, and then the reverb tails continue. And so I record that individually. And so we have like the reverb tails of the head, and then I record the whole thing all together so that when it loops, it will just automatically, everything sounds perfect. Like the reverb tails start like already mixed into the beginning of the loop file.
Yeah.
So when you play the head and then play the loop exactly when it should start, the tails blend into the loop and then it just keeps looping forever. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like a very basic way to do audio implementation for
Right.
a looping piece in a game.
Yeah.
But then
Okay.
sometimes you have way more complicated audio implementation.
And so that's how you record it, and then how does it sort of how is it implemented in the actual game? Because
Hmm.
obviously, I mean, I don't know, I've never seen this game, but obviously suppose that you go into like a different area in the game,
Hmm.
or something, I don't know, the end boss appears or something like that, right? Then all of a sudden it sort of changes into a different loop, right? Or like, how do you do all that?
Yeah, so usually, if it's not in the engine itself, like you'll have a piece of middleware come in, and that will sort of handle all of the events and the sort of things that you're triggering with the game engine to play things back. And
Mhm.
I think you were cueing me to transition here to
Yes.
my audio middleware. So a program that I use a lot is a program called Fmod, which is one of sort of two industry standards when it comes to middleware in communicating with game engines, of how you essentially turn the all the different parts of the music and even the audio design, how it connects to the game engine. So there's Fmod and there is Wise, spelled WWISE. And Wise is way more sort of like spreadsheety, programmy kind of, you know, programmer brain type setup. So it's a little less intuitive for like a composer coming in and working with it. Whereas Fmod is all based on timelines. And it just finished loading, so I will share this. And this might
So it
look
has like a little bit
intimidating at
more of a
first.
DAW structure, I suppose, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I load this up. This might look a little intimidating, but this is still a timeline. These are still tracks that are playing simultaneously. Like for example, this is a little bit more of an easy one here, right? Like this is just one piece here. And so like if I were uh to press play, it would play this little piece. Uh, this is a little cooking bossa nova. And this will just kind of loop forever because it has this little blue section here, which says when you get to this point, start a loop transition back to this point. And so in this case, I don't even have a head file. I just have one piece that is looping internally. And then also, there's one little fancy bit here where if I up here is I'm pointing at the screen like you can see me pointing with my mouse here. If there is a parameter called is cooking. So when I say you're not cooking anymore, it goes to 0. And it fades it out and plays like a little symbol thing. So it's kind of like it is handling the ending based on this parameter that I just set in the engine.
Right.
And so this is a project file for a game called Moonglow Bay, which is a sort of fishing fishing game that has a pretty emotional story attached to it, but it's a sort of everyday life fishing out in your boat type of game. And so the main giant piece of music here is the open world. So you are sort of out in the town. There's time of day. There's weather. There's being in your boat. There's going to different parts of the town. All these things are considered in the music that I designed for this project. And we don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to go really fast through this.
So all of these files are like audio files that you basically bounced out of Ableton, right? And
Yep,
and it almost looks like how you would sort of build a live set in Ableton, where you
absolutely.
trigger
Yeah.
scenes, right, and sort of trigger separate sections of tracks individually or everything
Yeah.
together, right?
Exactly. So I can just get in here right now. I'm going to set in player home and I'm going to press play. And it just has these two tracks here. So you got Day Home Melody. I can mute this one. It's just playing like the guitar chords here. And this one is the melody. And so they're just playing two tracks back to back here. And there's also these other two parts here. This is just day outside. So when I change this parameter and I say, okay, let's go outside, the engine is looking at that and it's going to start transitioning. So now it's playing sort of orchestral parts and a different guitar part. We got the orchestral parts here, got the guitar here. Well, no, it's not playing because that's the at-home thing that it's no longer set to full volume. And then let's say it is now sunset in the game. So we set that parameter. You can see over here, it's starting to affect the volume. So some of the tracks are lowering in volume. And this is all stuff that I scripted up to basically happen over time when the parameter is read in a certain way. And so now it's just playing this guitar part here. If I go in here and follows playback position, so when it goes to the end of this little part here, you're going to see that it doesn't actually go to the next part of the piece. Actually goes to an ending chord, and so the piece actually ends because the day has come to an end. And now it's going to start playing the night music, which is down here. So all of these little green flags here are logic that are essentially set up in the project, the timeline. And so every time it gets to one of these flags, it is looking at parameters. So there's one that's called on boat, and it's looking for, is it set at between 0.5 and 1. And then if it's like set like that, then it's going to go to a certain part of the timeline. And so all these things are like ending, for example, like is sunset means it's going to end. So all of these things are kind of like being evaluated by the engine here in Fmod, and then also in the game, it's setting these parameters. And so by setting them up in Fmod, I am essentially programming how the music plays based on how these parameters are set in the game.
Yeah. And so the gaming engine triggers the Fmod triggers, I suppose, and then it knows exactly what to play when.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just all kinds of parameters here because it's a very this all got built up over time. Like it didn't kind of start like this. It was just like, oh, we need rainy weather music now. So I had to add in like a rainy version of the track. And so when it actually finishes here, you will see it transition back to daytime, but it'll be the rainy version because I set weather rain to 1. Now, what's fun about Fmod is you can just run this in real time and just like imagine scenarios. So you're just like playing the game in your head and you're just setting parameters. And essentially, so now this is a sunrise piece that I wrote and just happens straight in the same tempo as everything else. And so it's just blending all those stems together because it's in the same tempo, it's in the same key, like everything can be played in sequence. And it really is just kind of depending on how you arrange it, how you script it. You can just do all kinds of cool stuff like this.
But, you know, this once again sort of underlines like how important that initial theme is, because if that's, you know, not strong enough, you're never going to be able to write all these infinite almost variations of that same theme, right?
Exactly. So like the very first thing I did on this project was write one piece of music that was the main theme for the game, and really just kind of imagined all these different scenarios that it could be reimagined in, because, you know, it's going to be like, here's all these different permutations that it's being used in. And so, you know, through experience, through just kind of like the amount of time I've spent writing music, like I can kind of gauge those things for myself and, you know, hopefully come up with a theme that stands strong amidst everything else.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, and also like it's still an insane amount of music, right? Because if you sort of compare it with the sort of Ableton session that we looked at in the beginning, you know, which was, I don't know, a minute and a half long, fully arranged already. But Yeah, you once you've submitted that, and so this fmod situation comes into play, it's basically 10 times more work after that, right? Because it does look
Almost.
like a lot of extra stuff that you still are doing sort of based on that initial idea.
Yeah, but like there's also like some things you can take into consideration while you're writing that can be really useful, especially stuff that I've done in other like games where if you're writing this like really lively, complicated piece of music, try just soloing a couple of parts together and hear how they sound together. If you're writing really interesting parts, like you can just hear like the drums and the bass together and like
Yeah,
that sounds really cool. And so that could be a layer in the game. Like you don't even have to write new
yeah,
parts of the music. Like you can just kind of take parts of the arrangement and start messing with them, and maybe you need to add in one extra little bit here to like make it come together, but you can still kind of use what you've already written
yeah, yeah.
to create these sort of new arrangements that are being used by the game engine in different situations in the game.
Yeah, yeah, it's like, like I do that in tracks as well, right? Where you have like
Hmm.
a say a
Like a
main
breakdown or
theme.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, or
Hmm.
you have like a main theme and then
Yeah.
you can make one section where all those
Hmm.
things are reversed, or it's maybe with loads and loads of reverb on it with a different percussive element or whatever, right? And so before you know it, you sort of like expand, I guess, that initial idea into, 15, 20 little variation. Like you said, everything stays in the
Yeah.
same key, stays in the same tempo.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you just build on that, I suppose. But so, um, obviously, this is all like in super close communication with your team because,
Yeah.
once you have these initial elements and they're feeling the idea, are they just sort of like, emailing you every day of like, oh, now we need a rainy section, or now, we're going in the depths, or like, is that kind of how you sort of start building and expanding, or do
I
you
mean,
already
ideally,
do a little bit of that work?
yeah, like ideally, a lot of this is planned ahead of time.
Yeah,
Like, when you have, especially for any game that requires really like long-term planning, like you're going to have to scope it, right? You need to come up with like what are the features that we can actually ship? What are the
yeah,
ones that we can actually finish with the team and the time and the money that we have? And so when you are sort of building that list of like things, you prioritize them, right? You sort of give them rankings of like this is the must-have. This is, the first priority. This is kind of like this will come later because we don't need to do it immediately. And there's also like the would love to have, like the want to have kind of category of things of like if we have time for it after we finish the most important parts, like we sort of have these stretch goals that we can get to,
yeah,
that you know and so in the case of like a unique rainy music or like a different mix for when it's cloudy, like those are all things that kind of came after everything, all the important stuff was done.
yeah, yeah,
And once we had sort of determined like, okay, we have a shippable game. We have what's called the minimum viable product.
yeah,
Um, and so you have the game in a strong form, and then if you have time, you have money, you have budget left, essentially, you can kind of put stuff into the would be nice to have categories and start to come up with a bunch of uh, things that you can actually complete that you had concepted, year or two ahead of ahead of time, and then you can kind of come back to it and be like, okay, we actually have time for this. Let's put a let's have Lena arrange a sort of jazzy drum thing for the rainy version of the music, whatever it is.
yeah, yeah,
And so that it's really kind of down to planning and down to just having a good producer that is able to keep track of everything and make sure that you are, you know, prioritizing the stuff that's important.
yeah.
So you can
Um,
actually get to the stuff that's nice to have.
and how much sort of comes down to, for you at least as the composer,
Hmm.
comes down to like sound quality, mix downs, leveling stuff. Maybe there's specific parameters that go with video gaming. Like a lot of people play on different kind of sound systems and things like that, right? Like,
Hmm.
is that stuff that you concern yourself at all with, or is that like a completely different section of the team that sort of takes care of that?
Well, depends on how big the team
You
is.
wish, you wish it was people that did that
I
for.
wish someone could come in and do all of my mixing for me, but
Yeah,
as it stands, like I am the music person, so I am responsible for everything.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I mean that's just another part of the budget, the time budget I have to consider for a project is like once everyone's happy with the music, then I need to finalize it. I need to finish it. And so that comes to usually just down to doing mix downs, like really good quality mix downs for all the individual stems. And I have to prepare the stems um, for implementation. Sometimes I do the implementation myself, like with the project I just shared. Sometimes there's an audio team that's going to be implementing them. Maybe it's just the programmer that's putting them into the game. But whatever it is, I have to kind of make a good quality stem to send over, and that's going to sound good in the engine. For games, a lot of the time, like music is mixed lower than it would be if you're just listening to it. So mastering isn't as huge of a concern. Like you still want to have a good mix a master that is sort of like it it sounds good, but like if you play it with all the sound effects and everything, like you still need to sort of have a good level there. And hopefully there's a sound designer or audio person that is doing a mix down of the game, like the full game. And
yeah,
they know what they're doing and they can also prioritize your music in their mix so that it's not just hidden away in a corner somewhere. Like
yeah.
that's something I've dealt with every now and again where it's just like hearing it in the game, I'm like, I can barely hear my music. Can we please turn it up? And usually the answer is like, well, depends.
Right, yeah,
Um, and sometimes there's in-game sliders for the players to like make their own mix. So like if they want to crank the music, they can just do that on their end.
yeah. Or
Um,
like
but
yeah,
then
because you also have sound effects, right? Sometimes,
yeah,
so you need like some sort of like headroom, I suppose, for all that stuff to sit
a lot
on the
of
top. Or
ambient environmental effects, like,
oh
if
yeah,
there's like wind sounds, birds, waves, that kind of stuff. Like
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff to take into consideration. And sometimes like what is really useful for me is I will play the ambience. If the sound has already been designed for those areas, like I will play the ambience files while I'm writing. So I
mhm.
know what the sound bed is that I'm competing with.
Right,
So I
right,
can know where to kind of stick out a little
yeah.
bit.
Or you can also
But that
use
really
it,
kind of,
I suppose,
yeah, yeah,
like as an
that's part of the piece.
inspiration. Or
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
that sounds
for sure.
amazing. Yeah, it's
That
cool.
really
It's
kind of
like
comes down to how much is done.
yeah, yeah. No, it's just fascinating because you're not just delivering like a singular piece of music, but you're kind of like delivering in an environment, right? And
Mhm.
so you're not quite sure how that music is being experienced depending on how the gameplay sort of
Mhm.
develops, right? And so
Yeah.
if I'm just, like in a specific place in the game and I just stand still for a while, then I'm just going to be sort of stuck in your, you know, loop for
Yeah.
forever, while
Mhm.
other stuff I might sort of run through and I will never sort of fully experience it, right? So it's got this kind of like harmonica-esque sort of structure to it, right? Where, some stuff might be experienced way longer than you maybe as a composer expect it to be, while other things sort of like go very quickly, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. And
yeah,
that's what I love about games. Like I love that it's experiential, right? It is something that you are experiencing at a period of time. And, whatever that is for you as the person experiencing it is usually very different from other people. So,
yeah,
you kind of have to account for that. And
yeah,
it's exciting. It's the
yeah.
fun part of the process.
Yeah, not to mention like the sort of layers of everything, right? Where
Yeah.
sort of bouncing all these separate stems and sort of having those play in different combinations. Like it's like literally an environment in
Mhm.
sort of sonically, rather than just a sort of a track that you always hear in the same way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. So inspiring as well. I'm like, how can you put Fmod and sort of play live sets with that? Like,
You could.
I'm just sort of, when you were sort of cycling through all these things, I was like, okay, what if, you know, all my drums would be in there, and like how they sort of fade into other sections. Like, there's so much possible all of a sudden.
It's definitely something that I've considered for like my own live sets. Like I
Yeah,
very rarely play live, but like, hey, it would totally make sense to just script like a
yeah,
structure to a set and just, if I want to loop something and do transitions without having to like do all the sliders myself, like, hey, I mean, I
yeah,
can just program it basically.
Yeah, or for like,
It's fun.
for ambient stuff,
Hmm.
or like, yeah, or you could sort of apply to real life, where you have like I don't know, an exhibition, and
Yeah,
in the exhibition you go into all these different sections and it sort of triggers all these
yeah.
separate, yeah, okay. Let's get busy.
Possibilities
There
are
was a
endless.
few questions. Let's
Oh,
see.
sure.
There was let me see. Oh yeah, yeah. Like, how many pieces of music do you have to submit if you would sort of have to guess? For example, for that for the game that we just sort of looked at in Fmod, um, is that sort of like eventually you're gonna have to mix everything, bounce everything? That might be like you know a terrible job.
I mean, it's work that I have to account for in like the hours that I'm working essentially
Hmm.
and what I'm billing for. It's because ultimately everything is also like part of a business arrangement with the company that I'm working with. And kind of you just kind of have to approximate sometimes. Like sometimes it's like minutes of music is what I'm charging. Sometimes it's very rarely it's like hours worked because it's kind of really difficult to track like hours that I'm working when I could be like on a walk and like
Yeah,
thinking about music because that's technically part of the process, but I'm not really like on the clock necessarily.
yeah,
So it's kind of like how much music can I get done? What is my realistic uh rate of work for that? And sometimes like especially more recently, like it's been just kind of becoming a part of the team when it comes to like revenue share. So like I'll sell the soundtrack and I'll have like a cut of the game sales and that kind of comes into play with what I get compensated for. Like maybe I'll have a bit upfront just to kind of help get the ball rolling with money and being able to afford working on a project, but then the long-term success of the game is like benefiting me in some way. So like that's
yeah,
another way. But yeah, a lot of music. Like most soundtracks that I work on are sort of like uh, between an hour and a half to 3 hours of music, depending on how much is actually in there. And it could be sort of deceptively long because there's a lot of layers and stuff that you want to represent, like on a soundtrack, for example.
yeah.
But that's kind of like the average is around hour and a half, 2 hours of
Um,
music.
I also saw that like on your Bandcamp,
Hmm.
you offer the soundtrack of the games as well.
Yeah.
So is that also part of this sort of like negotiations where you own like certain rights to the music, or you can sort of exploit it in a way by yourself
Yeah.
on top of what happens in the game?
Yeah, so like soundtrack rights are valuable, and if you are signing away your soundtrack rights to a publisher or the developer, then like for me, I would expect to be compensated for that in the upfront costs.
Yeah,
Because when you finish a game and like maybe it gets popular, like Celeste or something like that
yeah, or
is really
Minecraft.
successful, and now people want to buy the soundtrack. Um, then if you are able to sell your soundtrack, have soundtrack rights, then that is sort of an additional revenue stream for you. And especially for me, like royalties are like a big part of my income now, and is why I'm able to afford being more picky on projects. Is I can afford to choose which ones I'm working on because there's a royalty revenue stream essentially that is like funding my work at this point.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be possible without keeping the soundtrack rights and performance rights for the stuff that I've worked on.
Would you say that that's also something that was born out of starting to work with indie developers, where there is more of a sort of shared revenue rather than
Mhm.
working for like the really big companies that might just want to pay you off for the work?
Yes, because big publishers, big platform holders like Microsoft, Sony, they want to own everything.
Yeah.
If it's a big corporation, they want to own it so they can exploit it. So,
What a
so
surprise.
sometimes, hey,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's sort of led to me not working with them as much because I do like to own the creative properties that I work on. But it's kind of like it's a negotiation of like is it worth it to have uh this on like my work on Minecraft, like it's a huge deal that that it's part of this franchise that's played by millions of people across the world. I
Yeah.
don't own the music anymore, but it's worth it to me because there's just a lot of people that have been exposed to my music, and it's a cool project. So
Yeah.
it's kind of little trade-offs here and there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, super similar to the sort of electronic music or dance space, right? Where
Hmm.
sometimes you do sort of projects for exposure, I guess, or for at least sort of some sort of profile.
Yeah.
And also, you also want to make sure that you always sort of try and own your own rights, or at least have a say in whatever happens to the music, right?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
yeah. Let's see. There's a couple more like little questions. When showing your template, you talked about using your sub to emphasize something. Can you expand on how you use the sub musically? Oh, that was I guess from the Ableton project.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I just like to have a sub in there because there's always a need for just bass emphasis, especially if you're working with like some synths or samples that are like not quite as bassy. So like I just add that into projects while I'm working if I just want to layer in more bass into a part to really just kind of give it that sub quality to it. It's just a nice tool to have that's always just loaded in there.
Yeah. Um, Also, I guess you can almost do the variations on the theme on autopilot after enough practice. Is that something that you do a little bit? Like, are
Oh
there sort
yeah.
of certain techniques that you always use to explode the main theme into like infinite varieties?
Yeah, I mean, like a thing that I love to do is just like reharmonization, doing stuff where like you just have the melody and then start playing different chords under it and to kind of like develop it out that way. Or it could just be taking the chord progression for the piece and then just improvising on top of it, like just making, soloing over it, doing, various things to kind of just expand on the material in a way.
Hmm.
So that it's not just the exact same thing over and over again.
So usually, when does it happen? Like sort of early on in the process already, or do you wait until you get the go ahead and then start exploding basically all these
Um,
variations?
Yeah, I definitely like I'm definitely fixated on finding the theme first, right? Like I want to make sure that that is solidified and like approved. But from there, it really kind of comes down to like what else it's being used for.
Yeah.
If there is, a different emotional context that it's being used in, if it's a different like physical location, what are the different things that you could bring into an arrangement that would change the piece?
Yeah, yeah. Um, Last one. Apart from references and sharing actual music sketches, are there any other ways in which you communicate musical ideas to someone who might not be the musician or producer, like in the team?
That I communicate to them.
Yeah,
Uh, Not really. It's very difficult to say like this is what I'm thinking without actually showing them music.
yeah,
And so I always want to have a sketch, at the very least, even if it's a piano sketch, if it's like an idea for a melody or a progression or something that I can share, because without that, they're composing in their heads. They're trying to be the composer. And I don't want that
yeah,
to be the case. I don't want them to be the composer because I'm the composer.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I want to put my idea in their head. And if they are providing reference and like building up this thing for themselves, then that's sort of it's difficult to do my job in that case.
yeah. I had a conversation earlier today actually about sort of people working with briefs where
Mm,
very often if you work with specific briefs you always get the same examples, right? Because everyone wants pretty much, the energetic track or the, moody piano piece or like, there's all these kind of like stereotypes, especially for people that aren't musicians, right?
yeah.
Do you ever feel like, you have to sort of push back a little bit or like sort of put your ideas ahead of theirs
Mm.
or like how does that sort of tension work?
The best like reference that I ever get from like a director or a designer on a project that I'm working with is when it is multifaceted, right? Like I never want to get the exact piece of music that they want me to write.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
if they have like temp music, if they have something that is just like, we want this, but you, like I can't do that because I will just write that, And so what I need as reference is like, here's at the very least four or five different pieces that kind of inform what they think about something that are from different sources. Like it can't just be like four pieces from the same game because then that's another game soundtrack, and I
Yeah.
don't want to write the other game soundtrack. I want to write this game soundtrack.
Yeah.
So basically, like giving me a lot of different like uh, uh, points to plot on a map that I can then find the middle point that is what makes them happy for their project.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, what soundtrack? This is a good, maybe a good ending one. What soundtrack did you like working on most, and what are your favorite video game soundtracks and composers?
Oh, big question. I think the most fun that I've had so far is a game that it's technically still in production, but we're just like adding more and more music to it. Is a game called Beastie Ball, which is a uh, a sort of Pokemon-like sports game where you're forming a team of volleyball playing beasties, and it's just it's all kinds of wild styles. Like I've written basically every genre under the sun for this game, and it's so much fun because it's just constantly like new things. So it's like over 3 hours of music at this point, and we just keep adding more. And it's just uh, everything that I get to write for is just like so crazily varied that I'm just like, I don't know. It's like an incredible portfolio of like, here's what I'm capable of doing. It's
Yeah.
everything.
It's your magnum opus in one game.
It's yeah, it's really fun. I'm
Nice.
really enjoying that.
And that's coming out still, or?
It's out in early access right now, so you can technically buy and play it, but like the animation work is ongoing. So it's like because it's all hand animated uh, creature designs, all of that work has to be hand animated by like a team of three core animators, and so it's just sort of been this ongoing process. And I'm adding new tracks to the game, like as they're doing that, to kind of give people more fun stuff to experience in the game.
Nice.
Um, and my favorites, uh, so many favorite soundtracks, but amongst them, the soundtrack to Chrono Trigger is, obviously a classic, but it's also like one of the games that got me into writing music in the first place. There's a bizarre game called End of Eternity in Japan, Resonance of Fate in the US, that is like a collaboration between two composers that is very like orchestral, but then also just like sort of like prog rock kind of stuff. It's just like really cool stuff. I love everything that's in the soundtrack.
Hmm.
Uh, there's what was another one? To do Vagrant Story as a soundtrack by Hiroshi Sakimoto. And then also his team went on to make a soundtrack for a game called 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, which is a just incredible like story tactical mech game type thing. And it's got this really, really cool like electronic soundtrack that is dynamic. It's got a bunch of different like cool like stuff that it goes through with the gameplay, the sort of tactics gameplay that it has, and just some of the coolest electronic music I've ever heard. It's so cool.
Nice, nice. You have to send me a list, like so I
Yes,
can explore
definitely.
some stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Amazing. So inspiring and interesting to hear how you sort of build these kind of like sonic environments, if you want to call it that. Hope you enjoyed it. We sort of gone through a whole bunch of things, and it's really nice to just sort of see your entire workflow. I
yeah.
hope you enjoyed it, Lena. Was it not too painful?
No,
So- okay,
easy
good.
stuff. I love talking about this stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks everyone for coming and checking out what I do.
Nice, beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope we cross paths at some point and talk more about all of this. I'm definitely going to look into Fmod as well. Just I want to
Yeah,
see how all that works. Um,
yeah.
and
It's free
yeah,
to check out, so you can just download it. So
nice, cool. All
yeah,
right, and everyone else, thanks so much for joining us. And we'll put this out on like a public place so that other people can access it as well, which will be really nice, I think.
yeah,
And yeah, thank you so much, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
yeah. Thanks so
So,
much.
all right, have a good one. Bye.
Take care.